Most people think the world changes when something explodes. A war, a crash, a public disaster. That idea is comforting, because it makes change easy to notice. But that's not how reality works. The biggest shifts happen quietly, when no one is paying attention. And this week was exactly like that. Three things happened that looked ordinary, forgettable even. But together, they quietly changed how the world works. Now, let's start with energy. For years, Venezuela was treated as a finished story. Sanctions in place, production collapsed, political chaos locked everything in. Markets adjusted, investors moved on, energy models learned to ignore it. But that assumption is starting to crack. Not because Venezuela suddenly recovered, not because sanctions disappeared, because expectations changed. And in energy markets, expectations matter more than barrels. There is growing talk that Venezuelan oil could partially return to global markets. Not fully, not freely, selectively. And that one word changes everything. Because oil prices are not set by supply alone. They are set by what markets believe might happen next. When traders sense potential supply, behavior shifts. Hedging strategies change. Investment decisions pause. Political leverage moves. For the United States, this isn't about helping Venezuela. It's about flexibility. A sanctioned producer that can be partially unlocked becomes a tool, a valve. Pressure on inflation can be released. Pressure in geopolitics can be reapplied. For Russia, this is uncomfortable. Even the idea of alternative supply weakens leverage. And for OPEC, coordination becomes harder. Energy security is no longer about abundance. It's about fragmentation. And that's the new normal. Now, let's talk about heat. Australia is facing one of its most severe heat waves in years. At first glance, this looks like a climate story. It isn't. This is an economic stress test. Power grids were built for the past, not for sustained extremes. When temperatures rise, demand spikes precisely when systems are weakest. Failures cascade. Insurance risk grows quietly. Claims rise. Coverage tightens. Premiums jump. Agriculture becomes unstable. Water systems strain. Transport slows. Supply chains weaken. Governments are forced into emergency spending. Money that should go to resilience goes to damage control. Every extreme event adds hidden costs. Healthcare systems overload. Productivity drops. Food prices creep higher. Markets are starting to notice. Climate risk is no longer theoretical. It's operational. Australia isn't unique. It's early, and that should worry everyone. Now here's the part most people miss. A UK far-right activist recently appeared at a Russian nationalist event. That sounds small, fringe, irrelevant. It isn't. Extremist movements no longer operate alone. They connect. They align. They exchange narratives. This isn't about one person. It's about signal. When domestic political extremes intersect with foreign geopolitical interests, friction rises quietly. Trust erodes. Policy becomes unpredictable. Alliances strain. Markets hate that. Governments struggle when consensus breaks. This doesn't collapse systems overnight. It makes everything slower, more expensive, more fragile, and fragility is costly. So why do these stories matter together? Because they all point in the same direction. Energy uncertainty increases inflation risk. Climate extremes strain public finances. Political fragmentation raises volatility. Capital becomes cautious. Governments become reactive. Long-term planning gets harder. This isn't a crisis moment. It's a transition moment. And transitions are where risk is most often mispriced. So don't just watch headlines. Watch signals. Watch how markets react to possibility, not reality. Watch how governments respond after systems fail. Watch where narratives quietly align. Because by the time consequences are obvious, it's already too late to react. Now, here's what makes all of this more dangerous than it looks. None of these shifts are extreme on their own. Venezuela is not flooding the market with oil. Australia is not collapsing under heat. One extremist appearance does not change a country. That's the trap. The world doesn't break from extremes. It breaks from accumulation. Small changes, repeated stress, quiet normalization. Energy markets don't need chaos to misprice risk. They just need uncertainty to linger long enough. Climate systems don't need collapse to hurt economies. They just need variability to become routine. Political systems don't need revolutions to weaken. They just need friction to increase year after year. This is how resilience erodes. Not with a bang. With fatigue. Decision-makers start reacting instead of planning. Investors shorten their time horizons. Governments trade long-term stability for short-term calm. And calm can be expensive. Because when systems are optimized for efficiency, they have no room for shock, no buffer, no slack, no margin for error. That's why these signals matter. They show us where pressure is building, even if nothing has cracked yet. And history is very clear about one thing. By the time pressure becomes visible to everyone, it's already too late to adjust cheaply. Now, here's where all of this starts to matter in real life. Because these shifts don't stay inside systems, they leak out. Energy uncertainty doesn't just affect markets. It affects prices, jobs, household budgets. When energy becomes fragmented, everything downstream becomes unstable. Governments talk about resilience, but resilience costs money. And money has to come from somewhere. Climate stress works the same way. Heat waves don't announce themselves as disasters. They arrive as disruptions. A few days of lost productivity. A few transport delays. Higher insurance premiums. Nothing dramatic. Until it repeats. And repetition is what turns inconvenience into crisis. Political friction follows the same pattern. Most people imagine instability as something loud. Protests, riots, collapse. But modern instability is quieter. It shows up as delays, as indecision, as policy that keeps changing direction. That kind of instability is exhausting. For voters, for businesses, for institutions, and exhausted systems make bad decisions. That's the common thread here, not collapse. Fatigue. Systems pushed just far enough, often enough, that they stop absorbing shocks and start passing them on. That's when costs accelerate. And that's when small signals start turning into real consequences. So what does all of this mean? It means the world isn't becoming more chaotic. It's becoming more strained. Energy systems stretched by politics. Climate systems stretched by extremes. Political systems stretched by friction. None of them are breaking. Not yet. But they're losing flexibility. And flexibility is what keeps systems stable. When flexibility disappears, every shock costs more. Every mistake lasts longer. Every decision becomes harder to reverse. That's why this moment matters. Not because something exploded, but because pressure is building in places most people don't look. Markets are adjusting quietly. Governments are reacting cautiously. Institutions are conserving energy. That's not confidence. That's adaptation under stress. And history tells us something very simple. The biggest mistakes are made not during crises, but during transitions. When things feel manageable. When danger feels abstract. when urgency hasn't arrived yet. This is one of those moments. So don't wait for the headline that makes everything obvious. By then, the cost of reacting is already high. Pay attention to the signals. They show you where the future is forming, long before it becomes unavoidable. And that's what this channel is about. Context before consequences.